Welcome back to the weekly news roundup. I hope everybody is wonderfully ready for some excellent new Linux news for the week. And we are going to start today talking about an application that was an alternative to Google Photos is now entirely open source. Now, of course, the downside is right now it still does require you to use their servers, but they have open sourced their server code as well. Their main application code has been open source for a while. It's just that their server code was not, and now that is done, and they waited for 2 separate security audits before open sourcing all the code just to make sure there were no bugs in it. And so this is the NT application, and this is going to be effectively a near complete replacement for Google Photos. So if you're currently storing all your stuff over in the Googles and you don't want them using that stuff for other AI and other advertising and marketing and all the other nonsense that they allege that they are not doing, but we kind of know they sort of are. You can have a look at this application as well. So looking at their pricing, starts at $3 a month for 50 gigabytes, up to $20 a month for 2 terabytes. And you can actually, here's the basic quick codes for Google Play and Apple for the normies. But you can also do the Google Play, the Apple Store, F-Droid. There's a web application. There's a desktop client. There is a desktop client for Linux, Windows, and Mac. And they do have a APK directly created by them available on their GitHub page. They also have F-Droid. So this is, hey, a really nice alternative. It'll be really neat if they release the code, the ability that you could actually host your own server on your own cloud platform and then change your software. Maybe it does do that. I didn't find any statement about that, but that would actually be a neat thing. Of course, that would kind of defeat the purpose of their pricing models, but hey, they're basically paying for the server fee anyway. So if you are looking to get away from Google Photos, that is certainly an option, is consider looking at NT, which is now entirely open sourced. This was a little bit of a controversial one in the latest Linux kernel. 6.7 Linux kernel release does some manipulation with the AMD GPUs. So you used to be able to have full control over your power control, and I was talking to Dan about this last night, who does a lot more stuff with the gaming and the tweaking things. And he said the thing is that you can adjust your power rating to find an absolute sweet spot. And the sweet spot is going to allow, you to basically optimize your graphics card, minimize your CPU, maximize basically all the efficiencies. And what they did in the latest Linux kernel is they got rid of some of the low-end cutoffs of this, meaning that you are forced to use your AMD GPUs at a higher power rating than you would otherwise. And of course, the part might be, hey, if you run it too low, you might actually hurt it. And that is the thing. If you try and run circuits with too low of power, you can actually damage it. That's just something to keep in mind. This is why you have to be careful if you're using Raspberry Pis to make sure that you're using properly rated power sources, depending on the applications, what you're trying to do. That controversy, look back to my concerns about getting a Raspberry Pi 5 right now is I've not yet found a good enough DC to DC converter to take a 12 volt to a 5 volt with the higher amperage output onto a USB-C adapter. I haven't found that yet, although I am still actively looking. Not that I couldn't possibly put it together with an adjustable or a variable buck converter or something like that. But you have to be careful at running too much power into it. But what they did in the latest Linux patch at 6.7 is they reduced the range by which you can adjust your power on your GPU. So in theory, it might prevent a few people from bricking their graphics cards, but on the other side, it might prevent some people from truly optimizing their cards as much as they want to. So be aware of that if you're going to a Linux 6.7 kernel and you are dependent on adjusting your power to custom ratings. Linux Mint is building a new desktop chat app. Of course, this is on the heels of HexChat is entering its last release. And Linux Mint was one of the last distros that comes packaged with HexChat out of the box. And it raised a question, what are they going to do? Are they going to come over and patch it up? Are they going to keep shipping it? Or are they going to do something else? Well, they're doing an approach that they are creating an application called Jargonaut, which is not a replacement for HexChat. It is not a standard ICR chat. What their argument here is most people are using HexChat, they allege or they believe, for doing the communications for like support into the Linux Mint support team, which still uses IRC as their main default. And in light of this, what they're doing is they're creating an application which is underpinning by the IRC technology, but rather than easily being able to add a lot of chat rooms or a lot of the functionality that HexChat has, is this only allows them to go in and basically connect to the Linux Mint support team. So it's basically is a chat application that only connects to the Linux Mint support team. I have to say I am not a fan of this move. Obviously, I'm not a person who's used IRC regularly anyway. I imagine that if you regularly use IRC, you're going to be looking for an alternative anyway, maybe adding HexChat back in as long as it works. If you're not using it, I don't know how many people are actually using IRC to do actual support with Linux Mint. Maybe it's a big enough user base to justify this, but I find this so limited and so niche. This will probably be the first application and maybe the second application I uninstall from any new Linux Mint build I do. The first being that stupid color shifting thing, because that's absolute nonsense and based on not real science. All right, so on to our last story here. Fedora is finally going to do it. They are dropping X entirely from the default build. Now, it's not completely gone. It's just no longer installed by default. And what this effectively is going to mean in the context of Fedora here is that when you install Fedora 41 fresh, you are only going to get Wayland. You will not have the ability in the login screen to select X at all. Now, if you are running an older version of Fedora and you upgrade to 41, X still remains on your system. If you still need to use X, you do have the ability still to install it. They're not removing it from the repositories. However, what they are doing is they are no longer installing it by default. Now, Fedora does work good enough with Wayland that this may not be noticeable by many people, although I am still getting some reports that a lot of games still are not working, and I have not tested my whole battery of screen recorders with Fedora. I do know that the screen recorder tests that I did with Linux Mint Experimental Wayland, looking at all those different screen recorders I tried, where I only found one that worked properly under Wayland. I tried the same batch with Debian, and I did not get any of them properly working under Debian, GNOME, Wayland. So not only is Wayland critically dependent on the software application, it's also critically dependent on the distro and the desktop environment. Wayland is still a mess. I'm sorry, we have to acknowledge that. Now, it's not that I think Wayland should go away, X forever. I'm not necessarily in that camp. What my statement and position has always been is we are pushing it too fast. We are pushing it too far, without realizing that, sure, some of the basic stuff that some of the basic testers might say, oh, wow, it works perfectly fine. But when you get to those odd edge and niche cases, like some of us do with Linux, like I'm a person that relies on Linux for a lot of my entire business backend infrastructure on web design, on my publishing company. Everything relies on using Linux. I do not use Windows or Mac for anything. And if I have niche applications that break because the Wayland isn't working and stuff like this, it backs me up. And this is the problem, is that really Linux has gotten really, really solid in the last 5 years. and we were about to have a major regression if every distro's like, oh, Fedora did it, let's drop it, and then these edge cases haven't been thoroughly tested. So I am not a huge fan of this. I think that we're pushing Wayland too fast. There are still too many issues with it. I'm not saying that the development should not continue. I'm not saying that it's horrible and it completely sucks and burn it with fire. What I am saying is that we are pushing the development of it too fast without having the competency to test the edge cases, because this is what happens in our current world, where our current world is really pushing to move things a little bit too fast without stopping and thinking of the overall consequences. But hey, at least if you still do need X, you can still install it on Fedora. It's just not going to be installed by default. So there you have it. And there's more fodder for you guys that think I'm crazy for my Wayland only, big Wayland, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Sorry. Run your full businesses on Wayland and see if you're not convinced that X should stick around for a little bit longer. Well, if you want to help support the channel, we do have a locals page, switchedtolinux.locals.com. You can jump on over there. Of course, we have our short stories over there, and we have the links to participate in the on-air and the off-air hangouts over there for the supporters. So we can do those over there as well. With that, guys, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.